Shadowwood, Children of the Rift. Soville looked down at his detection tag, the machine that disguised his alien appearance from humans. The battery was dangerously close to running out, and the area he was in wasn't exactly known for being accommodating towards aliens. He chastised himself for making such an unwise move. He'd been working late at the pub and decided to take the quickest route home, not even thinking to check how much power his cloaking device had left. The streets at night weren't safe for people like him at the best of times, but if the rumours are to be believed, they are more dangerous now than ever before. Soville assured himself that they were just rumours. After all, if there really was a serial killer stalking the back alleys of Guildford, the authorities would have caught them by now, wouldn't they? The detection tag flashed red before fizzling out. He ran into a nearby park. It would take longer to get home, and he'd be covered in mud, but at least it was dark. At a glance, people might still be able to mistake him for a human. The park was an under-maintained mess of grass with trees placed seemingly at random throughout. Soville's house was right at the border of the park, which meant it could be another 10 minutes before he could get home. He walked as quickly as he could without making enough noise to draw any attention to himself. Soville slowed his pace when he saw that there was someone stood behind one of the trees in front of him. The figure was facing the alien, their legs and arms visible on either side of the tree, but their face and torso obscured. He reckoned it was probably some drunk taking a leak. It was Saturday night. Soville was grateful in a way. He was well aware that humans sometimes got up to much worse things at public parks in the middle of the night. He continued onwards, not giving the figure behind a tree a second thought. The snap of a twig caused Soville instinctively to spin around. He was expecting a platoon of frost agents to be there, itching to sink their teeth into another one of the aliens they hate so much. Of course, he was wrong. The park was empty. Even the suspected drunkard had sauntered off out of sight. Soville was getting paranoid. He turned back around. In that moment, he realised how wrong he'd been. He wasn't alone, and the rumours were true. Soville could feel his blood soaking into his clothes as a long blade was drawn out of him. He fell with his back to the grass and watched as the unfamiliar sky grew darker. Vex raised his arm and focused on the cans that he'd piled up a few metres away. He cleared his mind. The swaying countryside and distant cityscape seemed to fade out of his vision. All he focused on was the pile of cans, his target. He clutched the assortment of batteries that he held in his left hand. His right was pointed squarely at the pile. He felt the electricity exiting the batteries and flowing through his body, accumulating in his palm. He was still getting used to this process, but if all went to plan, any second now violet energy would erupt from his fingertips and scatter the cans. That's what would have happened had Rojeda's car not come hurtling up the dirt road and distracted the boy, causing him to lose control of the energy. He found himself momentarily propelled into the air before landing back into the tall grass, the tips of which were now scorched by Vex's accidental outburst. Suzanne came wading through the undergrowth, her flat cap hat defending her from the winter's sun. "Oh, sorry about that, love. I didn't mean to scare you," she called out. "It's all right," replied Vex, still lying on the field. "I've only gone and broken my back, no biggie." Rose should really stop letting you borrow her car. Well, if you're going to be like that then, I suppose you won't be wanting any of the breakfast I just went out and bought. Vex knew that Suze was joking, but he didn't want to risk it. Within a second he scrambled back up and ran to join her as she headed towards the large barn they'd begun using as their base. The barn was nothing in comparison to the Shadowwood hub, but it served its purpose well. Suzanne had seen that it was for sale and managed to convince Rogeda to use her computer skills to get it for a reduced price. Despite the fact that she'd forged all of her ID, Rogeda seemed apprehensive about the fraud. Rose's regrets were short-lived, however, as over the past few weeks the barn had become her personal pet project. She spent every hour that she wasn't at work setting up power, lighting, heating, computers, and even a high-tech escape teleport, should they ever need it. The interior of the barn had a certain charisma to it, especially to Ro and Suzanne, who had grown up in agricultural families. Earth was a very different place to her planet of origin, but this barn reminded Rogeda of home. Suzanne placed a plastic bag on the round wooden table in the centre of the barn before sitting herself on one of the 3 charity shop armchairs that surrounded it. Vex did the same, but Rogeda seemed distant. She hunched over her laptop, barely visible beneath the glare of the array of TV screens that were hooked up to their salvaged Rift monitor. They were hoping that the monitor would one day report an opening to Suzanne's universe, but they had had no luck yet. "Oi, Ro!" shouted Vex. "Susan's got some sausage sandwiches from the only cafe in the world that you like." "Which incidentally isn't the cafe that I work at." Rogeda didn't reply but simply continued tapping away at her keyboard. Suzanne went to investigate. She leaned over Ro's shoulder to see what was on her screen. There'd been another murder last night. Rogeda didn't reply but simply continued tapping away at her keyboard. Suzanne went to investigate. She leaned over Ro's shoulder to see what was on her screen. There'd been another murder last night. "Same guy?" she inquired. "It would seem so," answered Rogeda. "Same modus operandi. The victim is a lone extraterrestrial killed with a blade through the chest." "Gosh, that's the 8th time now, isn't it?" "9th, actually," the alien corrected. "And no one's doing anything about it. The police don't seem to be, and I hardly see anything on it on the news. In my world, Shadowwood would have dealt with this." "Nobody's doing anything about it because he's only going after aliens," interjected Vex. "If he was killing humans, he'd be in the jail by now." "Either way, he poses a massive security risk and innocent lives are being lost," informed Rogeda. "Sounds like a job for us then." "No, Vex. Suzanne and I have been discussing it. We've put you in enough danger as it is. Wherever possible, we'll require you to stay behind for your own safety." Vex looked to Suzanne, hoping she'd disagree. He'd proven himself too many times just to be treated like a kid again. Unfortunately for Vex, Suzanne didn't give him the permission he wanted. Vex sat and watched Ro's car pull away from the barn and down the dirt road. The 2 women were driving into town in order to speak to family of one of the victims, hoping to figure out something about the killer's identity. They offered to drop Vex off in town, but he refused, partly out of teenage angst. He understood why they didn't want him involved. They felt responsible for everything that had happened to him. Human-alien tensions were worse than they had ever been, and by involving themselves with the killer's victims, they might become targets themselves. It made sense, but Vex couldn't shake the feeling that he could be, should be, doing something more. But he couldn't do anything whilst stuck in the barn, with nothing except fields for miles around. Vex straightened his leather jacket and set off back towards the pile of cans. Ro's car was parked on the side of the road next to a sign labelled The Bryant Estate. The car was surrounded by a sprawl of unassuming tower blocks and brutalist-style houses, given an atmosphere of peace by the abundance of willow trees planted along the pavement. Suzanne and Rose stood in a lift travelling up through one of the larger tower blocks on the estate. Opposite Suzanne stood a man who was otherwise ordinary, except from the fact his skin had the same texture you'd expect from a cliff face. Suze reckoned that he was likely just an alien. After all, humanoid aliens weren't uncommon, but something about him was distinctly earthly. It was only after about 2 minutes when Suzanne realised that she was staring, and that the man was staring back, looking, with good reason, pissed off. "Haven't you ever seen someone with a rift burn before?" the man questioned antagonistically. Suzanne, who was usually quite good at awkward conversations, found herself at a loss for words. Rogeda, almost as if she had stolen Suzanne's social skills, stepped in. "No, I don't believe she has," stated the alien. "She's just moved to the area from Cornwall." The man seemed satisfied by Rogeda's excuse and leaned back against the grimy wall of the lift. Right. I suppose that makes sense. Sorry about that. When you live your life looking at me, you have to grow a bit defensive." Rogeda knew what he meant more than most. "I'm sorry if this is rude, but what is rift burn?" asked Suzanne. "Not at all. The more people who understand, the less hassle I get," started the man. "Rift burn is what happens to some people that grow up near the rift. When you're a kid, the rift can sometimes change the way your body works. From what I've seen, the effects are completely random. Some people can tell the future because of it, or some move things with their minds, but sometimes it's a lot worse. The rift can do terrible things to you. It really can. Compared to some, I came off lightly. What with my skin and all. Anyway, this is where I get off." The lift doors reluctantly hoisted themselves open, and the man left the pair alone. "Oh, cheers for saving me there. I don't know what I'd do without you sometimes. You know, I haven't really had the time to tell you this, Ro, but you've been my rock. Ever since I got stuck in this universe, you've been there for me, and thanks for that." Rogeda blushed and tugged at her shirt collar awkwardly. She couldn't think of a way to phrase it, but she knew that Suzanne was aware that the feeling was reciprocated. "I'm surprised that you've never encountered rift burn before," the alien claimed, possibly trying to change the conversation. "The rift in this world and yours would be identical, so they must surely have the same effect." "Yeah, weird that. Maybe it does happen and I've just chalked it up to something else. I mean, nothing from my universe is immortal, so maybe that's because of the rift. Mind you, there's a bit of a gap between having unusual skin and being able to live forever. I wonder what happened to the Norton of this world. I haven't seen him since that whole thing with the deranged. I'm going to be honest with you, Suzanne. I don't much care what's happened to him. He joined Frost completely of his own accord and only felt the urge to leave after they kidnapped his daughter. As tragic as that is, Frost destroys alien families all the time, and he only found fault with them once it affected him. Yeah, he was a horrible piece of work. I can't stop thinking about what happened to his daughter, though. From what I can tell, the whole point of Frost is to take control of everything alien through whatever force they see fit. I can't see how kidnapping a human girl helps them in any way. Power, stated Rogeda, as if she knew it for certain. Why do you say that? Once the regime took over my world, they forced us all to practice their religion. Any deviation would be met with severe consequences. Sometimes, however, they would knowingly punish those loyal to the regime just because they could. Just because they had the power to. God, that's awful. I didn't mean to bring it up. It's okay. I wouldn't have mentioned it if I didn't trust you enough to know. This world is slowly becoming closer to mine. Organisations like Frost lead the way. That's why what we're doing is so important, Ro. Just helping where we can. It all helps. And yet, we're both planning on leaving this world. Nearly everything we've done has been in the hopes of somehow gaining entry to your universe. It's my home. It'll be yours too, and Vex's as well. It'll be safe for all of us. But the world we leave behind will still be as it is. The lift doors tiredly opened once again. Suzanne hoped they would leave the conversation behind those doors. She'd been dreading that Ro would eventually come to the realization that they'd be leaving this universe defenseless when they left. Suzanne spent many nights staring up at the ceiling, trying to figure out whether it would be right to leave. The universe she was born in was her home, but she'd been in this one long enough that she'd grown attached. She'd had responsibilities in both worlds, and Suzanne reckoned it would take her many more sleepless nights until she managed to decide which of those responsibilities she'd fulfill. Suzanne knocked 3 times on the blue peeling door of one of the top floor flats. My scanner is detecting some unusual energy signals from within the flat, Ro cautioned. I'll keep an eye out, responded Suzanne as the door opened slightly, held from fully opening by a chain. Who are you? Hastily questioned the flat's resident from between the gap. I am Suzanne, and this is Rogetta, the woman calmly clarified. We spoke to you on the internet. We're here to talk about your daughter, remember? Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm just so busy all the time. Things just slip past. Come in. Suzanne gave Ro a concerned look as the door was unchained. They had planned on questioning the alien woman, Pelrin Triss, about her daughter's murder, to see if she could give them any information on the killer. From the look of the flat, however, it seemed that Pelrin needed much more support than Rogetta or Suzanne could provide. The walls of the place were plastered with news clippings, photographs and website printouts about the killer. The small table in the combined living room kitchen area barely managed to sustain itself under the weight of dozens of cobbled together dossiers. You seem pretty determined on solving the case, I see, Suzanne observed. Yes. On my world, we believe that if a murder is left unsolved, then the victim's soul cannot pass on into paradise. Would it be all right if I slipped into my true form? Suzanne nodded at Pelrin to signal that it was. The woman took off a silver necklace, the pendant of which was an odd bullet-shaped device. Rogetta recognised the machine. It was a detection tag. Once the detection tag was removed, Pelrin's human appearance faded away. Her newly revealed grey leathery skin and deep-set opal eyes portrayed the tiredness that the woman had experienced after months of trying to solve her daughter's murder alone. As I was saying, Pelrin continued, I've been doing this on my own as the police don't seem to care. 8 aliens, 9 now, after that poor Soval boy, dead on the street, killed in the exact same way, and they haven't done a thing about it. I thought I'd have to solve all of it on my own until I heard about you. People are beginning to talk about what you're doing, your little gang. The Rift Raiders, Alien Avenue, the Tyrelect, Earth First. That was all you, wasn't it? Yes. Yes, it was, confirmed Suzanne. Do you mind if I ask a few questions? Go ahead. Rogetta was carrying out an investigation of her own, surveying the flat for the source of the mysterious readings that she picked up. Along the way, she found a clipping on the wall that she found particularly interesting. It was the account of the previous serial killer that stalked the streets of Guildford. The method of killing was strikingly similar to that of the recent murders, but the possibility of the killers being one and the same was next to nothing. The killer being described in the clipping was a cavalier from the 1600s. Removing the snippet of information provided Ro with what she was looking for. There was a small microphone embedded into the wall. Going off the energy signatures, it would be fair to assume that the entire flat was bugged. Suzanne, we need to go now. I'm sorry, but I can't let you do that, said Pelrin, moving to block the doorway. Pelrin, you knew about this, cried Suzanne. I had no choice. They said if I helped them, if I lured you here, that they'd investigate the murders. I had to do it, for my daughter's sake. The door opened once more, and 2 policemen walked in. Suzanne searched for any possible escape. The only way out was through the windows, and they were far too high up to survive the drop. Thank you for your assistance, Miss Triss, spoke the more squat of the pair of officers. Will you help me now, please? Inspector Woods, you said you'd help me. Pelrin pleaded desperately. We shall discuss our agreement later. Constable Singh, could you please take Miss Triss to another room? She is obviously not in her right mind. The taller officer went to protest, but then silenced himself, grabbing Pelrin by the arm and dragging her out of the room. We are not doing anything illegal, you know. What do you want from us? Demanded Suzanne, attempting to take charge of the situation. You may not be doing anything illegal right at this moment, but we now have a recorded confession of you taking responsibility for various crimes. You've been causing my upstanding friends in the Frost Agency quite a lot of trouble recently, and I simply won't allow it to go unpunished. You're not taking me, not taking any of us, interjected Rogetta, anxiety apparent in her voice. Now, Miss Jeddah, it's not like that. All we propose is a 10 p.m. curfew for you and your associates, just so we know that you aren't out causing any mischief. As long as you are within your places of residence by the time tonight, and every night for the foreseeable future, we'll stay out of your way. Does that sound fair? That's all? Suzanne queried. That's all. Suzanne agreed and beckoned Ro to leave with her. Rogetta sat in the car whilst Suzanne stared up at the tower block. You don't seriously believe that Inspector Wood's terms are legitimate, do you? Inquired Rogetta. Suzanne leaned into the car to face her friend. Not for 1 second, Ro. Not for 1 second. When they returned to the barn, Vex was predictably annoyed about the curfew, but after 10 minutes of complaining in regards to his newly set bedtime, he seemed to calm down. The 3 were creating a file on the killer when the second car pulled up outside their base. Suzanne went to check out their mysterious visitor. Ro had to physically stop Vex from joining her. Suzanne took her pistol out of the small safe tucked away at the back of the barn and slipped it into her side pocket of the canvas coat, just in case it was the murderer that had decided to pay them a visit, or worse, Frost. Stepping outside, Suzanne was pleased to find that both of her theories were incorrect. However, the figure that followed them to the barn was still a potential danger. The tall police officer from the flat was in the process of getting out of a mint green VW van. Constable Singh, is there any particular reason you've decided to pop round, or is it just as a friendly visit? And how exactly did you know we'd be here? Asked Suzanne. Oh, call me Raja, not Constable Singh. I'm off duty. I followed you here for the flat. No one else knows you're here, and that's why we were to lure you out. I'm not here to do you any harm, he insisted. Oh, really? And why should I believe that? Because I'm going to give you some information that could lead to me losing my job if anyone knew I gave it to you, stated Singh, yet Suzanne seemed unconvinced. Luckily for him, Raja had a trick up his sleeve. Oh, and I brought lunch. Any concerns Vex might have had about Raja appeared to have flown completely out of the window as the boy tucked into the large pepperoni pizza that Singh had provided. Rogetta, however, was still critical, not allowing herself to cooperate with the man. Oh, come off it, Ro, reasoned Suzanne. You scanned the man yourself. He's got no weapons, no hidden microphones, no cameras. What's the worst that could happen? On my world, the theocratic regime sent out spies that posed as rebel sympathisers. The rebels that the spies came across would be burned alive as a sacrifice, said Ro bluntly. Okay, yeah, that definitely is the worst that could happen. Look, implored Raja, I'm not a spy or anything. I just want to help. I joined the police because I wanted to make a difference. Chief Inspector Woods is loyal to Frost. Same with pretty much everyone on the force. Turns out, making a difference wasn't high on their agenda. I wanted to leave, but I'd seen too much. They won't let me go now. I just have to do everything Woods tells me to do without questioning it. And Woods just does whatever the co-ordinator tells him to do. The co-ordinator? Interrupted Vex. She's the one in charge of Frost, right? Suzanne's mate Norton mentioned her. He's not my mate. At least not in this universe anyway, Suzanne asserted. Yeah, that's right, Vex, commented Raja. As I was saying, the police are entirely at her beck and call. Take the curfew that you're under, for instance. That was her idea. I don't have a clue why she asked us to do it. Rumours are that she wanted you three out of the picture, but perhaps she just changed her mind. I must get going now. I'm glad you've taken an interest in solving the killings. The police aren't doing anything, but I hope you can. This might help. Singh placed down a brown envelope on the table and left the barn, taking a slice of pizza for the road. Vex excitedly emptied the envelope. 3 chain necklaces and a scrap of paper fell onto the table. Those necklaces, they're detection tags, aren't they? Rose snatched up the detection tags before anyone answered Suzanne's question. The alien woman hurried over to her worktop to check the devices for trackers. What's on the paper then, Suzanne? Questioned Vex. Looks like an address. I don't recognise it though. I do. It's the old sanatorium. They used it to treat people with tuberculosis before it was abandoned. Everyone says it's haunted. One of those, if you go in there, you'll never come back deals. I don't believe it, but I've never really wanted to test it either. Well, I suppose we'll find out whether the stories are true soon enough. If Raja reckons the place has something to do with the killer, then we've got to go have a look around as soon as we can, especially now we've got to be home by 10. You need to think about this more carefully, challenged Rojeda. The detection tags are free from trackers, but they could have been given to us to lull us into a false sense of security. We could be walking right into a trap. Even if we are, we've been through worse, Ro. If there's just a slight chance that this might help us stop the killer, then we must take it, argued Suzanne. Fine. But we are to approach the location with extreme caution. Vex stays behind. No way I'm staying here, contested the boy. I get that you're worried after what happened with Earth First. But that was my fault, not yours. May I remind you that I saved all your arses back at Alien Avenue? You need me just as much as I need you. Rojeda took a deep breath before handing Suzanne a detection tag and reluctantly chucking one to Vex too. Suze locked up the barn and hopped into the car with the others. The abandoned sanatorium was quite a while out of town, but they still had 8 hours until curfew. As they drove, a single raindrop hit the roof of the car, high above Suzanne, Vex and Ro. A storm was coming. Later, Vex was sat on top of the parked car, peering into the forest valley below with Suzanne's binoculars. A cluster of Gothic cloisters stabbed upwards from the tree line. As Vex focused closer with the binoculars, he found the stories were only half true. Whilst the building was certainly old, it was far from abandoned. He could see that multiple plastic-coated cabins had been constructed around the sanatorium over the years. Figures dressed in white dashed between these cabins and the ornate structure. Zooming even further, Vex could see a single word printed on the side of each of the shelters, the word Frost. It seems my theory has been confirmed, announced Rojeda. Frost bought many of Guildford's historical buildings back in the 70s, it seems that the sanatorium was amongst those they purchased. If we had blindly trusted Raja, we would have driven right into one of their bases, right into their hands. It was a cunning plan. I'll allow them that.
Bollocks, cursed Vex. Still, at least we got some detection tags out of this whole thing.
Suzanne was less prepared to give up, however. That's just it though, the detection tags, they emit a disguise. If Raja was trying to get us into a trap, why would he have given us a device that would mean no one would recognise us? Unless he didn't want anyone to recognise us. There's something in that sanatorium that will give us the answers we need about the killer. Or at least Raja thought so. Ro, Vex, you can go back to the barn and pick me up later if you want. I am going to investigate.
I was sort of hoping you'd say something like that. I could do with a bit of action. I've been bored out of my brain,
admitted Vex. I'd rather none of us went, but I don't want either of you coming to any harm under my watch. Besides, I don't think you two know how to turn the detection tags on, Rogetta remarked. After 10 minutes of trudging through the forest, the three crouched low behind some bushes only a few metres away from the main frost complex. The area around the sanatorium was not unlike a military base, with large trucks trundling about and roaming regiments of frost agents clad in their strange uniform, a pure white three-piece suit paired with a white balaclava. Remember, the detection tags don't make you invisible. They just make you look like other people. See what they expect to see. If you act suspiciously or show any behaviour that could be perceived as unusual, the illusion will be broken and we will be detected, Rogetta whispered. They each switched on their tags and emerged from the forest, walking in formation in an attempt to imitate the gait of the frost agents. Ro actively had to stop her eyes from darting around in paranoia. Every few seconds she thought she saw a few agents staring at her, only for them to walk by without issue. Having a childhood like Ro had and will do that to you. As they got closer to the building, Suzanne nodded towards an uninhabited cabin which seemed to be being used as a storage for uniforms. The others understood and diverted their course. If anything goes wrong, text Indigo. We need to cover as much ground as possible without spending too long in there, said Suzanne as she pulled on a balaclava, completing the uniform.
We should split up then,
suggested Vex, as he struggled to button the white tuxedo over his already bulky leather jacket. Splitting up is a good idea, but you should stick with me. I think if you went off on your own, Ro would have a heart attack. To everyone's shock, Rogetta actually chuckled at this comment. The newly donned outfit suited the alien, as it wasn't much of a departure from what she'd usually wear, minus the balaclava, of course. They exited the cabin and joined a group of operatives that were heading into the building. As they made their way into the sanatorium, the first crash of thunder could be heard faintly in the distance. The interior of the place was initially indistinguishable from a modern-day British hospital, harshly lit and with featureless walls. Signs hung from ceilings. In a normal clinic, these would be used to tell patients and visitors where the different sectors of the establishment are, but instead they were being used to direct agents to different workspaces. Amongst them were signs for filing, maintenance, and the only one that made any sense for this building, the ward. It was clear that the layout hadn't been designed for the patient's benefit, if there even were any patients. Suzanne and Vex headed toward filing, whilst Ro headed separately towards the ward. Rogetta's anxiety sparked up once more when her friends disappeared into the labyrinth of anonymous corridors. The balaclava prevented her from breathing properly, and yet the acidic scent of cleaning agents seemed determined to claw through the restrictive cloth to rip at her sinuses. The world began to collapse in her mind as she pushed through the sea of identical agents, carrying various pieces of medical equipment, the only flicker of individuality being their exposed eyes. Overwhelmed, Ro practically flung herself through the nearest exit. She stood at the start of yet another corridor. This one, however, was unique. The walls to either side were lined with doors. Each door had a small window. Cautiously she approached the nearest window. Crouched in the corner of a small, characterless room was a sickly-looking boy. Ro instantly went to free him, but found that a large padlock had been placed on the door handle. On every door handle, it was apparent to Rojeda that there were no patients here, only prisoners. Her movements had attracted the boy's attention. At first he seemed startled, but then he began to move towards Rojeda. With every step he aged decades. He soundlessly screamed as his bones expanded, pulling his skin along with them. By the time he was halfway across the room, he was already too old to continue. Newly formed hair falling out in clumps, Rojeda dashed between the doors and was met with equally abnormal sights. A woman floating effortlessly in mid-air, a man whose flesh was constantly in a state of burning and reforming, a child with a vast city trapped behind her eyes. Riftburn, that had to be it. All the patients, prisoners, had riftburn. Amongst the many rows of filing cabinets, Suzanne and Vex had come to the same realisation.
What would Frost want all these people with riftburn for? And what does that have to do with the killer?
Asked Vex, checking that none of the other operatives were listening in.
To be honest, I've got no idea why Raja sent us here,
Suzanne confessed.
To answer your first question though, when I went into the Rift Raiders facility, someone from Frost was trying to buy aliens to use as weapons. This could be a similar sort of thing. Rift Raiders and Frost. I couldn't think of a worse combo. What are we looking for in these files, Suze? Again, I'm not really sure. Anything useful, I suppose. Oh, well, that really helps narrow down the selection, the boy complained.
Suzanne didn't respond with an expected quip, but instead stood looking blankly at one of the files, as if in shock.
Is everything okay? Take a look at this, beckoned Suzanne. This is the file of Charlotte Folgate, daughter of Michelle Price and Norton Folgate. Norton Folgate? Is that not the same name as your mate? Your mate whose kid was taken by Frost? He's not my mate. But yes, they must be the same. This is where their daughter was taken to. It says here that she was admitted in 1982 due to her displaying extraordinary telekinetic abilities. As a result of riftburn, looks like she grew up here, but there are no logs of where she went after 1991.
Rojeda struggled with a padlock. Neither her strength nor her technical skills could break any of them open. She didn't know whether it was due to stress, but she was completely powerless against the rather simple mechanisms. She didn't have time to ponder when the doors into the corridor were flung open. The woman who stepped in was wearing her own variant of the traditional Frost outfit, practically identical but lacking the balaclava and having a long black leather duster coat replacing the standard tuxedo-style jacket. Ro had never seen a picture of this woman before, but from the air of power that surrounded her, she knew exactly who she was. It was the co-ordinator. The woman's eyes pierced Ro, holding her in limbo between fight and flight.
You there! Are you actually doing anything? Demanded the coordinator.
Rojeda couldn't reply. She felt as if she was trapped in her mind, unable to communicate with her body.
If you're not doing anything, you can come and help me move this patient out of the building.
Ro, as if under a spell, drifted towards the coordinator. The previously mentioned patient was a thin-haired, stocky man surrounded by piles of history books.
I've never seen your eyes before. You're new here, aren't you?
Yes, Ro managed to stutter.
Ah, well, I'm awfully sorry for just expecting you to help me with no explanation. I do hope I don't come off as rude. I need help assisting that man through the building and into a van that shall be waiting outside for us. It might take a little convincing to make him leave his books behind, but he'll comply in the end. Although, I don't suppose you know who he is, do you? No. Are you aware of the cavalier killer of the 1600s?
Vaguely.
And do you know of the current killer operating in Guildford?
Yes.
That's him!
Which one?
Both! For some strange reason, the Rift decided to pluck the mind of the Cavalier and place it inside this man. It was only a few months ago when the dormant Cavalier personality activated, covered in blood. After his first killing, we found him terrified and alone, covered in blood, clutching a sword that he'd stolen from the museum. Poor thing. We brought him here to look after him, despite what your co-workers may say. That is what this place is for, looking after people. And occasionally these people do something in return for our care.
What does he do in return?
We take him to an alien-populated area and allow him to express his urges. He stays satisfied, and the aliens amongst us know their place.
So, that's where we're taking him. Taking him out so he can kill more aliens? Asked Ro, attempting to mask her disgust.
Oh no! He's got a very different job tonight. Much more important. Have any of your co-workers mentioned the 3 people who've been causing us a spot of trouble recently?
Yes.
Well, I've been assured by 10 p.m. tonight they shall all be in their homesteads, sitting ducks for our friend here. After he's through with them, well, let's just say that they won't be causing us any trouble anymore.
Jeddah was shook to the core by this revelation. The killer, Frost, the curfew, all of it was connected, and none of it was good. May I be excused for a moment?
Of course! Don't think me some sort of savage.
Vex and Suzanne looked down at their phones. The word Indigo flashed up on their screens. The storm had finally begun when the 3 assembled at the car, discarding their frost uniforms in a ditch.
What the hell do we do now?
Asked Vex as he watched the mud freed by the pouring rain soak into the pile of dropped clothes. Suzanne was nervously running her hands through her increasingly dampening hair.
I don't know. Even if we survive, that killer is coming after us. The police, Frost, they know where we all live. We can't go back to the B&B. We can't go back to Rose Flat.
Are you suggesting that we become fugitives? Disputed Jeddah, uneasy about the idea of going on the run again.
I don't think we have much choice. We'll have to lay low, at least for a while.
We could go to Newham. That's where I used to live, suggested Vex. It's been a while since I ran away, but I'm sure Harry and Martha would let me live with them again if I explained everything that's going on.
No, too close. If we're going to do this, we need to leave immediately and get as far away from Guildford as possible without going overseas. Scotland, perhaps, Ro declared. The 3 suddenly agreed and set off in Ro's car, unsure where they would truly end up. The weather had stirred the evening sky into a dark broth. The pouring rain scattered the lights of the town they were leaving behind over their silent faces. Suzanne looked out of the passenger window, trying to soak up as much of her surroundings as possible. Guildford was her last connection to her own world, and it was slipping away. Despite not living there, Suzanne had spent much of her childhood in this area. Even the outskirts they were driving through held memories for her. She walked along those distant hills with her family, watched her father play at that golf course. The sound of an approaching truck shook away her memories.
The truck quickly overtook their car and suddenly turned with such force that it diverted the course of the pummeling rain. The large white vehicle sat stationary, right in the middle of the road. Ro put her foot on the brake. It was clear what was about to happen. Frost had found them, somehow. There was no escape this time. Suzanne gripped her pistol. Vex gathered together anything he could take power from. There was no escape. They very well knew that this would be their last stand. That was until Ro slammed her foot on the accelerator, rocketing the car into the woods that bordered the golf course. What initially seemed like a stroke of genius quickly became another issue on their immense pile of unfortunate circumstances. The tyres struggled to coordinate in the river of slush that was once the forest floor. The front of the vehicle collided with an old oak tree, black smog now pouring out into the equally black woodland. "Run! Just bloody run!" shrieked Suzanne as she hurled herself out of the car into the brush. She heard the others do the same. They were all together, at least they had that. The inhospitable weather, paired with the near darkness, periodically interrupted the burning glow of lightning, meant that Suzanne was in a battle just to keep herself from falling over. She turned around to see whether Frost had followed them. Instead, she saw that Vex and Ro had run off in the other direction. She was alone. Ro Jeddah grasped the boy's hand tightly as they ran, possibly too tight. He was her responsibility, now more than ever. She wasn't sure where they were running to, but hoped that it was away from danger and that Suzanne wasn't too far behind. She'd soon regret this action. Ro Jeddah almost always acted on logic first, but this time she was acting on fear. Her aimless running had landed both her and Vex out of the cover of the forest and into the open. She realised where they were, stood in the middle of the golf course, exposed. What was worse, what was much worse, was the figure that Ro Jeddah could just make out behind a tree. Suzanne was also met with a figure, but this one made no effort to hide. Its long coat bellowed out, making it seem as if it was one with the shadowy thicket. "Trying to run away? That's rather naughty of you," chastised the coordinator in a strange, almost teacher-like manner in which she spoke. Suzanne, gun in one hand, rain pouring down on her face, wanted answers. "What is this all about, coordinator? I've been stuck here for months, dealing with your Frost lot. All the horrible things I've seen them do, and I have no idea why you do it. I can see that you can't control, but why do you want it? Please, just tell me, what the fuck is this all about? Order! Order and stability for those who deserve to be here. There's a reason the aliens are aliens, Suzanne. They don't belong here. The people work for Frost unite around me because they know that it's true. All we're doing is maintaining the natural order of things. You can't fault us for that now, can you? If it's you they unite around, then I don't have another choice." Suzanne raised the pistol, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have to think twice when she pulled the trigger. Vex looked on as Ro did battle with the figure from the trees, the killer they'd been chasing, and that was now chasing them. Ro fought with aggression and skill, putting aside her pacifism to protect the boy. The killer had a massive advantage, wielding a cutlass, whereas Ro Jeddah was unarmed. Each swipe of the blade drew closer and closer to her flesh. The woman was so focused on avoiding the onslaught that she didn't notice Vex launching himself at the man. All three of them tumbled into a bunker as a result. The sandy basin that was once used to catch rogue golf balls had devolved into a pit of sludge as a result of the storm. In the confusion, Rojeda managed to use what seemed like the last of her strength to heave Vex out of the bunker. She plucked a golf ball from the mire and had begun to repeatedly bring it down upon the man. The hard impacts seemed to have no effect on him, however, as he rose above Rojeda, the sand falling from him making it look as if he'd risen from death itself. He brought the sword above his head and prepared to make the final blow. Suzanne's bullet hung effortlessly in the air, suspended by a force so powerful that even the raindrops around the projectile were halted. The coordinator looked intently at the phenomena, satisfied with her work. "Extraordinary telekinetic abilities," mused Suzanne. "It's you, isn't it? The little girl they stole from Norton all those years ago is you. You are Charlotte Folgate." "I am the coordinator," she insisted. "That is all that is relevant, all that matters. Frost saved me from that man. They knew that only they could teach me to live up to my potential." "Don't you see? They didn't teach you anything. They manipulated you. You were brainwashed from childhood into becoming Frost's leader. You were never given a choice. You're as much of a victim as anyone else." The coordinator didn't speak, but her eyes burned with rage. The floating bullet began to turn to face the woman that fired it. Suzanne started to dash out toward the golf course, but it was too late. The bullet pierced her back. The coordinator became one with the forest once more. A flash of purple energy pierced the sky above Rojeda. She knew that this was no lightning bolt. The man was sent hurtling off across the field. Vex stood, radiating with power, his arm outstretched. He saved her. They'd saved each other. The time to rejoice was cut short as a crumpled form crawled out from the forest. Rose scrambled over to see Suzanne, bloodied and broken. With what may be her last breaths, Suzanne forced out 2 words.